Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, thank you for joining me today. Let me begin with a simple truth. American politics has a way of surprising us, often in the most dramatic and unsettling fashion. When I first began examining the trajectory of Donald Trump's presidency and his lingering hold on American politics, I anticipated legal challenges, political opposition, and economic contradictions. But what we are witnessing now is far more serious. Trump is in far deeper trouble than even I anticipated. Donald Trump's legal crisis has entered a stage that is far more severe than most observers anticipated, and it is now reshaping not only his personal political future, but also the very landscape of American democracy. What began as scattered investigations and lawsuits has converged into a complex web of criminal charges, civil rulings, and constitutional challenges that threaten to strip away the image of invincibility that Trump cultivated throughout his political career. The hook here is simple but undeniable. We are watching in real time the unraveling of a former president's legal defenses, and the implications extend well beyond Trump himself, or they speak to the resilience of the American legal system and to the fragility of populist movements that seek to place a leader above the law. Consider the sheer scope of Trump's legal troubles. No former U.S. President has ever faced such an array of indictments and civil suits simultaneously, from the federal charges related to classified documents mishandling to state level prosecutions on election interference, like to civil fraud trials involving his businesses. Trump is under siege on multiple fronts. Each of these cases alone would be enough to derail the career of any conventional politician. Together, they paint a picture of a leader who believed that power granted immunity and is now confronted by the reality that no one, not even a president, can escape legal accountability. This convergence is precisely what makes the situation more dangerous for Trump than initially imagined. He is not battling one narrative. He is battling many, and each case chips away at his claim of being unfairly targeted. The danger for Trump lies not only in the legal outcomes, but also in the accumulation of public perception. Courtrooms are not just legal arenas, they are theaters of legitimacy. Every headline about Trump's legal losses, every image of him entering or leaving a courthouse, and every ruling that deems his actions unlawful serves to erode his standing. Even within his loyal base, there is a limit to how much legal jeopardy can be dismissed as witch hunts. The hook here is subtle but powerful. When a leader who built his brand on strength, wealth, and success is constantly portrayed as embattled, cornered, and legally vulnerable, the very mythology that sustains him begins to fracture. Another dimension of Trump's deepening legal crisis is the way it complicates his political strategy. Campaigns are built on clarity of message, but Trump's narrative is now entangled in court filings, subpoenas, and trial schedules. Instead of controlling the political conversation, he is reacting to legal developments. This reactive posture is a profound weakness for a politician who thrives on dominating the agenda. Moreover, the logistics of balancing court appearances with campaign rallies will test his capacity to project strength. The American electorate is being asked to imagine a president who might simultaneously be preparing for debates and legal depositions. That mental image alone undermines the aura of inevitability that Trump once enjoyed. The financial cost of Trump's legal battles also cannot be underestimated. Mounting legal fees, combined with potential fines and damages, drain the resources that would otherwise fuel a national campaign. While Trump remains a formidable fundraiser, much of that money is now redirected to his defense rather than to the organizational strength of his political machinery. Donors, too, are calculating their risks. For some, the prospect of throwing good money after bad becomes less appealing as the legal walls close in. This financial strain underscores that the legal crisis is not just personal, it bleeds into the very infrastructure of his political future. And finally, the broader institutional stakes must be recognized. Trump's predicament is a test of whether American democracy can hold its leaders accountable without descending into political retribution. Every indictment and ruling sends a message, not just to Trump's supporters, but to future presidents and political aspirants, that the rule of law still matters. The hook that should not be missed here is that Trump's downfall, if it continues along this trajectory, will serve as both a cautionary tale and a reaffirmation of democratic resilience. In many ways, this is bigger than Trump. It is about whether the United States can demonstrate to itself and to the world that even the most powerful individuals must answer to the law. Trump's legal crisis is not just deepening, it is redefining the boundaries of American politics. The system that he once sought to bend to his will is now tightening around him, and every step forward in these cases draws him further from the political dominance he once claimed. What seemed at first like scattered challenges has become a full-scale reckoning, one that places Trump in far deeper trouble than anyone, including his fiercest critics, may have anticipated. The federal courts have emerged as one of the most decisive forces in the unraveling of Donald Trump's political and legal standing, and their rulings have become a central turning point in his deepening crisis. What makes this particularly striking is that Trump long positioned himself as someone who could bend institutions to his will, who could weaponize power and project the image of being above ordinary checks and balances. Yet the courts, designed precisely to serve as a bulwark against executive excess, are now sending a powerful message: no president, former or current, is exempt from the rule of law. The hook here is stark and unavoidable. The same system that Trump tried to manipulate is the system that is now dismantling his defenses case by case, ruling by ruling. When federal judges strike down policies such as Trump's tariffs, they are not merely issuing technical rulings. They are rewriting the narrative of his presidency. Trump's economic populism was built heavily on the promise of tariffs portrayed as a weapon to protect American jobs, punish foreign competitors, and restore national pride. Yet, when the courts label those very tariffs as unlawful, it is more than a policy reversal. It is a symbolic collapse of the foundation of his economic strategy. Every judicial ruling that deems his executive orders illegal reinforces the perception that Trump governed not with precision or respect for law, but with reckless disregard for legal constraints. This is not simply a setback in court. It is a public exposure of the fragility of Trump's policymaking. The significance extends far beyond economics. Court rulings against Trump illuminate the deeper constitutional principles at stake. Presidents wield enormous power, but that power is bounded by law. When Trump expanded his authority through sweeping proclamations, often bypassing Congress or established procedures, he was testing those boundaries. Now the courts are pushing back with clarity, asserting that unilateral executive action cannot substitute for lawful governance. The hook for the American public is that this moment is not just about Trump's failures. It is about reaffirming that democracy has guardrails, and those guardrails can hold even when the pressure comes from the highest office in the land. These rulings also carry immense political consequences. Trump's supporters were told repeatedly that his policies were bold, decisive, and unchallengeable. They were framed as victories for the forgotten men and women of America. Yet the courts are systematically unraveling that narrative, showing instead that many of these policies were not just controversial, but unlawful. This erodes Trump's credibility in ways that even his most forceful rhetoric cannot fully repair. The more he rails against judges and institutions, the more he reveals himself as a man cornered by a system he cannot control. The hook here is psychological. A leader who thrives on dominance now appears increasingly constrained, undermining the aura of strength on which his political identity depends. Another layer to consider is the historical weight of these rulings. Federal courts rarely intervene so directly in presidential actions, particularly those that touch upon economic or national security powers. That they are doing so now is a sign of the extraordinary nature of Trump's overreach. Each ruling becomes part of a growing legal record that will define not only Trump's legacy, but also the precedents for future presidents. What may seem like technical judicial decisions today will be studied for decades as examples of how American institutions resisted executive authoritarianism. The hook for historians, policymakers, and citizens alike is that Trump's downfall is also becoming a case study in institutional resilience. Financial markets, businesses, and international partners are also taking note. When courts dismantle Trump's tariffs, it signals to the world that American policy is not solely at the mercy of one leader's whims. This restores a measure of predictability to global economic relations, but it also underscores Trump's diminishing credibility on the world stage. A president who claimed to negotiate the best deals is now revealed to have made deals that could not survive judicial scrutiny. For rivals such as China or allies in Europe, this weakens the perception of Trump as a negotiator and strengthens the argument that his leadership was more theater than substance. Ultimately, the federal courts have punctured the illusion of unchecked executive authority that Trump so carefully cultivated. They have shown with clarity and force that America remains a nation of laws, not of men. Every ruling chips away at Trump's political armor, exposing vulnerabilities he cannot mask with rallies, slogans, or defiance. The hook that resonates most is this: Trump, who once sought to redefine the boundaries of presidential power, is now being redefined by the very system he sought to overrun. Each court decision is not only a defeat for him personally, but also a reminder that in the United States, the law still carries more weight than political theater. Donald Trump's economic project was always at the center of his political brand, all, and at the heart of that project were the tariffs he proudly introduced under the banner of America First. He framed these tariffs as a shield for American workers, a way to reverse decades of outsourcing, and a bold strike against what he called unfair trade practices by countries like China. But as the legal system and economic realities catch up with him, those same tariffs are now collapsing under scrutiny. The hook here is striking. What Trump once presented as his strongest card, his ability to rewrite the rules of global trade, is turning into one of his deepest vulnerabilities, exposing flaws that even many of his allies can no longer defend. When federal courts ruled aspects of Trump's tariffs illegal, they struck at the symbolic core of his economic populism. For millions of supporters, tariffs were not simply a policy mechanism, they were a promise that America would no longer be pushed around, that ordinary workers would finally see justice in an economy tilted toward elites and foreign competitors. The courtroom rejection of these policies reveals that the promises were built less on legal durability and economic strategy than on political theater. This dissonance between Trump's rhetoric and the judicial outcomes creates a dangerous credibility gap. The more the courts dismantle his economic agenda, the harder it becomes for him to claim that he is the architect of a new economic nationalism. The deeper problem, however, is not just legal, it is economic reality itself. Trump's tariffs may have been politically popular among certain voters, but they imposed significant costs on the very people they were meant to protect. Farmers across the Midwest, small manufacturers, and even consumers at the checkout counter bore the burden of retaliatory tariffs, supply chain disruptions, and higher prices. The hook for observers is clear. While Trump presented himself as the champion of the working class, his policies often left those same communities struggling under the weight of unintended consequences. These outcomes are not abstract economic theories. They are real costs that chipped away at the foundation of his support. Even within the business community, Trump's economic populism is beginning to wear thin. For years, large corporations tolerated or even embraced his policies in exchange for tax cuts and deregulation. But as tariffs dragged on and the courts began striking them down, many in the business elite started to distance themselves. Trade organizations, industry groups, and corporate leaders began quietly acknowledging what economists had been saying all along: Trump's trade wars were unsustainable. The hook here is sharp. When even business allies once among his strongest defenders, start recalculating their loyalty, it signals that Trump's economic message is losing its most powerful backers. This financial and political erosion is compounded by the global dimension of Trump's failed tariffs. Instead of forcing countries like China to capitulate, his trade wars often emboldened them to create alternative alliances and supply chains. Europe, Asia, and Latin America responded not by folding under American pressure, but by diversifying away from the US market. This global reconfiguration undercuts the narrative that Trump had unique leverage on the world stage. The hook is ironic. A man who built his persona on the claim that he was the ultimate deal maker is being revealed through both court rulings and global economic realignments. As someone who weakened America's bargaining position rather than strengthened it. The legal defeats and economic backlash from the tariffs also have a corrosive effect on Trump's campaign strategy. His claim to success has always rested heavily on the idea that he delivered prosperity and jobs. But the mounting evidence is that his flagship policies were unlawful, costly, and counterproductive cuts directly into that message. Campaigns thrive on simple, powerful narratives, and Trump's narrative of being the economic savior is being complicated by facts that are harder to dismiss. Every legal ruling against the tariffs forces him to relitigate not only in the courts, but in the court of public opinion. The hook is this: instead of talking about a bold economic vision, Trump is stuck defending a track record that is increasingly synonymous with failure and illegality. The erosion of Trump's economic populism is also reshaping the political landscape more broadly. Populist movements rely heavily on economic grievances to mobilize support. If the figurehead of that movement is exposed as someone whose economic strategies failed legally and practically, the movement itself begins to lose coherence. Other populist leaders around the world are watching closely as Trump's unraveling sends a warning. Slogans and tariffs may stir crowds, but they cannot survive the test of courts, markets, and global realities. The American experience under Trump is becoming a cautionary tale that populism without sustainable policy is little more than political theater destined to collapse under scrutiny. The collapse of Trump's tariff narrative thus leaves him in a precarious position. The courts are stripping away the legal framework of his policies. The economic data is exposing their real costs. Business allies are stepping back, and global rivals are recalibrating in ways that weaken U.S. leverage. The hook that ties it all together is that Trump, who once branded himself as the defender of American workers against a corrupt global order, is now being revealed as the architect of an economic strategy that was legally fragile, economically costly, and politically unsustainable. In the end, his tariffs did not make America stronger. They made him weaker. Donald Trump entered politics with the promise of restoring America's strength and reclaiming its dominance on the world stage. America First doctrine was marketed as a bold recalibration of U.S. foreign policy, one that would force allies to pay their fair share, confront adversaries head on, and place American workers at the center of global economic relations. For a time, this rhetoric resonated with a segment of the electorate wary of endless wars and skeptical of globalization. But as the dust settles, it is increasingly evident that Trump's approach has left the United States more isolated, less trusted, and strategically weakened. The hook here is sharp. The man who vowed to make America respected again has instead overseen a decline in U.S. credibility and influence abroad, leaving the country more alone than before. Trump's trade wars, for example, not only created domestic disruptions, but also alienated long-standing allies, countries in Europe, Canada, and Asia, traditionally aligned with Washington, were forced to impose counter tariffs and explore partnerships outside the American orbit. These retaliations were not merely symbolic, they represented a strategic shift in how allies perceived the United States. Rather than viewing America as a dependable partner, many began to see it as unpredictable and transactional. The hook is sobering allies who once rallied behind U.S. leadership in global crises are now hedging their bets, investing in their own defense capabilities, and strengthening regional ties that deliberately reduce reliance on Washington. Even more damaging was Trump's posture toward multilateral institutions. From the Paris Climate Agreement to the World Health Organization, Trump repeatedly withdrew U.S. engagement, often under the banner of sovereignty and independence. But the long-term effect of this retreat was to create vacuums that others eagerly filled. China expanded its influence in global trade networks, while Russia exploited divisions within Europe and NATO. The image of America as the indispensable leader of the international order began to fade, replaced by the perception of a country turning inward and leaving allies uncertain about its commitments. The hook here is clear power abhors a vacuum, and every step back by the United States under Trump became an open invitation for rivals to step forward. Nowhere is this more evident than in Trump's approach to China. While he promised to confront Beijing with tariffs and tough rhetoric, the results of his strategy were ambiguous at best. China did not capitulate, it recalibrated. It invested more heavily in technology, expanded trade with Europe and Africa, and positioned itself as a global alternative to U.S. leadership. Trump's tariffs hurt some Chinese exports, but they also incentivized China to accelerate its self-sufficiency agenda, particularly in critical industries like semiconductors and green technology. The hook is ironic. In attempting to weaken China's hand, Trump may have inadvertently strengthened its resolve and accelerated its rise. On the security front, Trump's handling of NATO was equally damaging by publicly questioning America's commitment to Article 5, the alliance's cornerstone guarantee. He sowed doubt among European partners. While some applauded his pressure campaign for increased defense spending, the overall effect was destabilizing. Allies began openly discussing the need for a Europe less dependent on Washington, a conversation that would have been unthinkable just a decade earlier. The hook is unsettling a U.S. President who claimed to be tough on adversaries ended up shaking the confidence of allies more than the confidence of rivals. The Middle East offered another stage where Trump's strategy backfired. His withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal not only heightened regional tensions, but also alienated European allies who remained committed to the agreement. His overt alignment with Saudi Arabia and Israel further polarized the region, undermining America's ability to act as a mediator in conflicts. Instead of consolidating influence, Washington became increasingly viewed as partisan and unpredictable. Rivals like Russia seized the opportunity to expand their military and diplomatic presence in Syria and beyond. The hook is that Trump, who promised to end endless wars and bring stability, left behind a more fragmented and volatile Middle East. Trump's global isolation also carried a moral dimension. The United States has long derived soft power from its image as a champion of democracy and human rights, even if imperfectly. Under Trump, that image eroded. His admiration for authoritarian figures, his reluctance to criticize human rights abuses abroad, and his repeated attacks on democratic norms at home all sent a troubling message. Leaders from Moscow to Ankara to Riyadh saw in Trump not a defender of liberal democracy, but a partner willing to overlook abuses in exchange for transactional gains. The hook is striking. The world took note that the beacon of democracy had dimmed, and authoritarian regimes seized the moment to expand their influence without fear of U.S. pushback. In sum, Trump's foreign policy left the United States more isolated and less influential than it had been in decades. Allies felt abandoned, rivals grew bolder, and global institutions adapted to an America that was retreating from its leadership role. What was marketed as America first increasingly looked like America alone. The hook that resonates most is that Trump, who promised to restore respect and strength, presided over a period in which U.S. Power and prestige diminished in measurable and lasting ways. The very stage where he promised to showcase American dominance became the stage where America's limits were most visibly exposed. Donald Trump's political rise was powered by a narrative carefully crafted around grievance, victimhood, and the promise of redemption for those who felt left behind by globalization and political elites. For many of his supporters, he embodied the role of a fighter against corrupt institutions and an outsider who could finally give voice to their frustrations. That narrative, however, is beginning to unravel under the weight of relentless legal defeats, economic backlashes, and growing skepticism among voters who once believed his story of persecution and triumph. The hook here is compelling. A leader who once thrived on controlling the national story now finds that story slipping from his hands, replaced by images of weakness, legal vulnerability, and diminishing credibility. At the core of Trump's appeal has always been his ability to turn personal setbacks into political fuel. Every investigation was painted as proof that he was feared by the establishment. Every court ruling against him was recast as evidence that he was being targeted for standing up to elites. This strategy worked remarkably well for years because it aligned with the anger and cynicism many Americans already felt toward traditional politics. But the strategy has limits. As indictments mount and judicial decisions pile up, the sheer scale of Trump's legal troubles begins to strain the credibility of the narrative. The hook is simple but devastating at some point. What looks like persecution to loyalists looks like accountability to the broader public. Trump's increasing reliance on grievance also reveals a deeper political vulnerability. Successful populism thrives on a balance between anger and hope. Leaders channel outrage, but also promise a brighter alternative. Trump's message, once wrapped in slogans of winning and prosperity, is now dominated almost entirely by complaints of unfair treatment. Instead of painting a future where America wins again, he spends more and more of his political capital insisting that he is the victim of conspiracies. This shift narrows his appeal. While his core base may cheer, swing voters and independents see a man consumed by his own troubles rather than a leader with a compelling vision. The hook here is psychological when the image of a strong man collapses into the image of a man perpetually under siege. The aura of invincibility that sustains populist power erodes. Media dynamics amplify this unraveling. Trump once commanded the news cycle with bold, shocking statements that forced opponents to react. But now it is the courts, prosecutors, and investigative committees that set the agenda. Trump is constantly responding, defending, and explaining rather than dictating the terms of political debate. The coverage of his legal challenges dominates headlines more than his policy proposals, creating a feedback loop where the perception of weakness grows. The hook is ironic. A leader who built his brand on media dominance is now at the mercy of media narratives he cannot control, and each day that passes cements him less as a disruptor and more as a defendant. Financial pressures deepen this narrative collapse. Trump presents himself as a billionaire immune to ordinary struggles, yet the enormous legal fees and potential financial penalties reveal vulnerabilities that clash with his image of unlimited wealth and success. Reports of fundraising being redirected to pay legal bills further reinforce the perception of a movement more focused on protecting one man than uplifting a nation. Or supporters who believed they were funding a political revolution are beginning to notice that their donations are covering attorney fees. The hook is sharp. A movement built on empowerment risks looking like a mechanism for sustaining one man's personal survival. This unraveling also has international consequences. Populist movements across Europe and Latin America often look to Trump as proof that defiance of elites could win lasting power. As his narrative weakens, those movements confront a cautionary tale. Trump's reliance on grievance without delivering lasting solutions makes him less a model to imitate and more a warning sign of how populism can collapse under its contradictions. The hook here is global. What once seemed like a formula for political success is being revealed as a fragile illusion. Ultimately, the erosion of Trump's populist narrative strikes at the foundation of his influence. Without the perception of strength, his claims of a victimhood sound less like courage and more like desperation. Without victories to point to, his grievances seem less like proof of authenticity and more like excuses for failure. The hook that resonates most is that Trump's greatest weapon, his control of the story, is slipping away. The very narrative that made him a political force is breaking apart under the reality of repeated defeats. And as that narrative collapses, so too does the political force it sustained. American democracy has always been tested at moments when powerful individuals push against its boundaries. And Donald Trump's political and legal entanglements have created precisely such a test. The essence of this moment is not merely about whether one man succeeds or fails in his personal battles, but whether the institutions designed to uphold the rule of law can demonstrate resilience against unprecedented pressure. The hook is urgent. What unfolds in Trump's clash with the courts, investigators, and the political system is not only about his future, but about the credibility of American democracy itself. Trump's ongoing confrontation with accountability forces the nation to grapple with a central question: is the United States still a country where no one is above the law? For years, Trump's ability to evade consequences, whether through delaying tactics, political maneuvering, or exploiting divisions, created the impression that he could outmaneuver the very system he swore to protect. But each indictment, each court ruling, and each investigation challenges that assumption. These proceedings are more than legal formalities. They are symbolic tests of whether democratic institutions retain their capacity to enforce norms and uphold justice. The hook here is stark. If a former president who openly undermined democratic practices is held accountable, democracy proves its strength. If he escapes unscathed, it risks signaling fragility. The stakes are magnified because Trump has deliberately framed these proceedings as political persecution. By portraying legal accountability as partisan attack, he seeks to erode public confidence in the impartiality of the judiciary and investigative institutions. This narrative is dangerous because it transforms legal scrutiny into a loyalty test. Are you with Trump or with what he describes as a corrupt establishment? The hook is psychological and political. When citizens begin to doubt that justice is impartial, the very foundation of democratic legitimacy starts to wobble. The courts must therefore not only deliver verdicts, but do so in ways that sustain public trust, demonstrating that their actions are grounded in law, not partisanship. The resilience of American democracy is also being tested by the behavior of its citizens. Democracy is not upheld by institutions alone, but by the willingness of people to accept the outcomes of lawful processes. Trump's efforts to delegitimize elections and cast doubt on the legal system place extraordinary pressure on public opinion. Will Americans accept that a former president can face consequences, or will significant portions of the population retreat further into conspiratorial narratives? The hook is profound. The durability of democracy may hinge not on Trump's actions, but on whether citizens choose facts and law over myth and loyalty. Elected officials, too, are part of this test. Many Republican leaders remain reluctant to confront Trump directly, fearing the wrath of his base. Their silence or equivocation raises questions about whether political self-preservation is being placed above constitutional duty. At the same time, Democrats must navigate the challenge of ensuring that their pursuit of accountability does not appear vindictive or overly partisan. The hook for the political class is clear. History will judge whether leaders rose to defend democracy or shrank from the responsibility in favor of short-term advantage. On the global stage, this test carries implications far beyond America's borders. Other nations are watching closely to see whether the U.S., long a symbol of democratic resilience, can confront internal threats without collapsing into authoritarian drift. Rivals like China and Russia use Trump's attacks on American institutions as evidence that democracy is messy and unstable. Allies, meanwhile, wait to see whether the U.S. can reaffirm the principle that the rule of law applies universally. The hook is international. America's ability to hold Trump accountable will not only define its domestic trajectory, but also shape its global credibility as a defender of democratic values. There is also a generational element to this test. Younger Americans, already skeptical of institutions, are witnessing a defining moment in real time. Their trust in democracy may be reinforced if accountability prevails, or further eroded if they conclude that powerful figures can bend the rules without consequence. The implications for civic participation, voter engagement, and future political culture are enormous. The hook here is forward-looking. The choices made today will shape how the next generation views the meaning of democracy itself. In the end, Trump's deepening troubles are inseparable from America's larger democratic test. Every ruling, every indictment, every legal proceeding is more than a chapter in his story. It is a page in the story of how resilient American democracy can be when challenged. The hook that ties it all together is this: Trump may believe he is fighting for his own survival, but the real battle is over whether the rule of law can withstand the strain of his defiance. In this sense, his crisis is not just personal, it is national, and the outcome will determine how strong or fragile the American democratic experiment truly is.